Hi there, I'm Nigel Poulton and welcome to your weekly Kubernetes moment. I've written a sort of mini-series of blog posts recently on service discovery in Kubernetes, and I've been really fortunate, I guess. They've been really popular, generated a lot of discussion, a lot of feedback, a lot of people grateful for the explanations that I've given. Anyway, so I thought I'd take a stab. Oh, actually, I'm also adding a service discovery chapter to my Kubernetes book, the Kubernetes book, which will come out in the February 2020 edition. Anyway, so I've been thinking about service discovery a lot, so I thought I'd weigh in with a little video. And this time I thought we'd talk about the impact that namespaces have on service discovery within Kubernetes. So we probably, maybe you do or maybe you don't know, that a namespace in Kubernetes allows you to divide a single Kubernetes cluster into multiple virtual clusters, each virtual cluster being called a namespace. And it's cool and all. It gives you like access control to objects within each namespace. It lets you do quotas and all that kind of stuff. But what impact do namespaces have on service discovery within Kubernetes? So let's start at the top, right? Every Kubernetes cluster gets an address space, and most objects that you create in Kubernetes, their names live within that address space. So a service, for example, if you called a service my service in a normal Kubernetes cluster, the full address or the fully qualified domain name of that service would be myservice.default, because it's in the default namespace, let's just say, .svc.cluster.local. Cluster.local just being the default address space of a Kubernetes cluster when you build one. You can, of course, build your Kubernetes cluster to have pretty much any namespace that you want. So it could be myservice.default, because it's in the default namespace, .svc.nigelpoulton.com. You would, of course, have to configure your Kubernetes cluster with its address space as nigelpoulton.com. I mean, you'd never do that, right? Maybe I would. Anyway, by default, the address space of a Kubernetes cluster is cluster.local, and services live behind the svc.cluster.local address space, yeah? Anyway, within a namespace, a Kubernetes object name must be unique. So you could not, within the same namespace, let's call it the default namespace for now, you could not have two services called my service. In order to do that, you would need two namespaces, because the namespaces partition the Kubernetes cluster address space. So you might have two namespaces for two environments. For simplicity, we'll call it dev and prod. Okay, so a dev namespace and a prod namespace. As long as you have those, you can then deploy identical configurations, one into the dev namespace and one into the prod namespace. The idea being there that you would want your dev environment to exactly mirror your prod environment, or when I say exactly, as close as possible. So object names to be the same in the dev namespace or the dev environment as they are in prod. It just means as you move things into production from dev, you don't have to change things like names, and when you're troubleshooting, it just means that your configuration can look more identical in dev, as your dev environment can look as identical as possible to your prod environment. Anyway, so if we have a dev namespace and a prod namespace, and we want to deploy the same my service to both of those, one would have a fully qualified domain name or an FQDN of myservice.dev.svc.cluster.local, and the one in production would be myservice.prod.svc.cluster.local. Now, we've been putting the names up along the bottom here to kind of help you. I'm in the car. A little bit tricky to explain, but the impact that namespaces have so far as service discovery goes in Kubernetes is they allow you to partition the address space so that you can have objects with the same configuration and the same name on the same cluster, but in different namespaces. Now, if let's stick with the dev and the prod examples, okay? If you have that same my service in both of your namespaces, and you are running an application in the dev namespace, for that application to be able to connect to the my service service, it just needs to connect to the short name my service. If it wants to connect to the instance in the prod namespace, it needs to talk to the FQDN, or the fully qualified domain name. That would be myservice.prod name.svc.cluster.local. So resolving names within the same or within the local namespace, you can use short names. To resolve names across namespaces, you need to use FQDNs. And that's your tip for this week. I'm Nigel Poulton. Subscribe to the channel, check out my book, the Kubernetes book, check out my videos, Pluralsight, Udemy, all those places. Sign up to my weekly Kubernetes Now email at nigelpoulton.com, and peace.